After 2 harrowing years in darkness and captivity, 20 courageous hostages are returning to the glorious embrace of their families, and it is glorious.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Monday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From Hamas releasing all 20 of the living Israeli hostages to President Donald Trump's address to the Israeli legislature. But first, our correspondent in Tel Aviv gave us the lay of the land from on the ground as that ceasefire deal comes into effect after 2 years of war. Hamas has released all the living hostages as part of the ceasefire deal with Israel. The liberation bringing what many hope to be an end to the war once and for all between the militant group and Israel. More than 1,900 Palestinian prisoners are also being released by Israel today, leading to celebrations from families of those hostages seeing their family members for the first time in more than 700 days. Maxim Hartkitt's family celebrating as they watch video of him being returned to Israel today. Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton is in Tel Aviv for us. Good morning, Blake. What a day to be there. All living hostages now released. So how did this all play out? And what about the remains of the hostages who are the hostages who are no longer alive and these Palestinian prisoners being released today? Can you give us an update?
Good morning, Holly. We had the first release of the first batch of living Israeli hostages at around 8 a.m. local time this morning. They were handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross. They were then taken to Israeli forces who brought them to a military base. There they reunited with their families and were given initial medical treatment. A second group was delivered to the Red Cross a few hours later. And then at that point, all 20 living Israeli hostages were returned to Israel. They've been brought in groups from that military base near the Gaza border to medical centers here in Tel Aviv. And I actually just saw another helicopter with hostages aboard in the sky over to my right, because as they're coming into Tel Aviv throughout the day, they've been doing flyovers over Hostage Square, where tens of thousands of people have been gathered since the early morning, watching large screens, watching the images of the hostages being reunited with their families, and really enjoying and celebrating a great moment and a great deal of relief after 2 years of protests in that very square. However, while there's been plenty of relief and joy there, just in the last little while, we're getting information about the release of the deceased hostages, the 28 deceased hostages. Now, we had understood that not all of them would be released today. U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff had told hostage families that it would be difficult to find some of them, and that an international team will assist with retrieving bodies. However, the umbrella group that represents the family members of the hostages have said that they were told that they understand now that only 4 of the 28 hostages' bodies will be released today. Now, they've said that they are shocked and dismayed by this information, and they've called it a blatant breach of the agreement by Hamas. There's been no official confirmation by the Israeli government of that situation yet, but this is the main hostage group. Now, once the living hostages were released, Israel began releasing the Palestinian prisoners it is exchanging. That includes 1,700 people who've been detained in Gaza since the war began 2 years ago. Among them are children, women, as well as medical professionals seized when Israel raided hospitals. They have begun just in the last little while arriving in Khan Yunis to huge crowds and celebrations there. They will also undergo medical treatment and be reunited with their families. We've also seen the release of the 250 so-called security prisoners. These are prisoners serving life sentences in Israeli jails. They were taken from a prison in the West Bank. Many of them were then taken to Ramallah, the main city in the West Bank. Others were released, a much smaller number, but others were released into East Jerusalem. And still further from that group of security prisoners, some will be taken to Gaza and many more will be sent into exile abroad.
And Blake, President Trump is in the Middle East, so how is he being received, and What did he have to say in his address to Israel's parliament this morning? He spoke in front of the Knesset. And what's next on his agenda? Does he stay in Israel? Does he leave? What do we know?
So he's really received something of a hero's welcome, and this really is a victory tour of sorts. He arrived at Ben Gurion Airport to a red carpet ceremony, was welcomed by Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as President Herzog. In the hostage square, the crowds have been chanting his name all day. He's received Israel's highest honor, highest civilian prize. And he went to the Knesset in Jerusalem. He had further meetings. He met hostage families there. And his central message, really, since he left the United States and arrived in Israel, has been that the war is over. He was asked about that before leaving. He confirmed it is. He was asked by a reporter, and when he got to the Knesset, he said, yes, the war is over. When he entered the Knesset, he was given a 2.5-minute standing ovation. And in that speech, he thanked Prime Minister Netanyahu. He praised him. He thanked his team, including Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, as well as Jared Kushner. And he said the long and painful nightmare is finally over. He reiterated time and time again that the war is over.
For so many families across this land, it has been years since you've known a single day of true peace. But now at last, not only for Israelis, but also for Palestinians and for many others, the long and painful nightmare is finally over.
Now, that does seem to be a purposeful effort to leave no misunderstanding, leave no room for interpretation, that though far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition have said that once the hostages are released, if Hamas is not dismantled or destroyed, that Israel should go back to war. But President Trump has been unequivocal in his insistence that the war is over, and he has provided guarantees to the international community as well as to Hamas that Israel will not go back to war and that future developments will be negotiated. And that's where the next step of his trip comes in. He is now going to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where he will co-chair a meeting of more than 20 world leaders who are really trying to carry forward this momentum that got us to this point, to the agreement in this first stage of the deal. And they are trying to implement the full peace plan, the full 20-point peace plan that President Trump has proposed. The rest of this, the rest of the realization will be much harder to reach. There are major obstacles to overcome, like the disarming of Hamas, deciding on the composition of this transitional government that's meant to govern Gaza, as well as this international stabilization force that's meant to enter Gaza and assist with demilitarization. Israel's full withdrawal from Gaza is tied to their progress. And so far, we haven't learned yet which countries will contribute, when it will be assembled, and when it will be ready to deploy. So that will be a major topic of discussion at these talks, and we expect to hear announcements and commitments related to that force.
All right, a lot of work ahead, but today we will use the day to celebrate at least this small step. Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton for us. Thank you, Blake. And in other headlines this morning, a mass shooting at a South Carolina bar has left 4 people dead and at least 20 others injured. That shooting happened early Sunday morning at Willie's Bar and Grill on St. Helena Island. Sheriff's deputies arrived to find a large crowd and multiple gunshot victims. The bar's owner described the scene as mayhem and called for the community to support each other during this difficult time.
I'm thankful for everybody who walked away. I'm thankful for everybody who's alive, who is safe. And we just gotta come together and support each other at this time. I mean, it's kind of what makes or breaks community.
On Sunday, 2 people were killed after a small plane crashed in Fort Worth, Texas. That plane burst into flames, and the whole thing was captured on video from a camera at a business nearby. Thankfully, no one on the ground was injured. The FAA has started an investigation into that crash. And the planet has reached a tipping point with coral reefs and what's being called by a new report as an almost irreversible die-off. 160 researchers worldwide describe global warming as crossing dangerous thresholds much earlier than expected. The warning comes from Global Tipping Point's report released just weeks ahead of the COP30 climate summit. Coming up on Today as It Happened.
It said it was still open, and then when we showed up, we saw that it was closed. So we're super disappointed. He's been so excited to see all the dinosaurs and everything. It was supposed to be a surprise.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories. Vice President J.D. Vance says there will be deeper cuts to the federal workforce the longer the government shutdown continues. As the shutdown continues, Vance warned the new cuts would be painful. More than 4,000 federal employees will soon be fired. It's according to the Office of Management and Budget. And this shutdown began after Democrats rejected a short-term funding fix and demanded an extension of health insurance subsidies. Negotiations are virtually non-existent as both parties blame each other for the impasse. The ongoing government shutdown is not just affecting federal workers, it's also impacting the lives of everyday Americans. Government-funded services have been cut. Even places like the Smithsonian Museums and the National Zoo in the nation's capital are now closed to the public.
We're a little bit disappointed. We were looking forward to using the day off the holiday to come show the kids the museums because we don't get to do that very often, and we don't get a day off of work either. And so I looked it up online to see if it was it had different holiday hours, but it said it was still open. And then when we showed up, we saw that it was closed. So we're super disappointed. He's been so excited to see all the dinosaurs and everything. It was supposed to be a surprise.
Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen now joins us live from our nation's capital. And Stephanie, you have been out and about speaking with people all along the National Mall. What are they saying?
Hey, Holly, good afternoon. Well, people are certainly disappointed that they are here in the nation's capital and they're not able to go to the Smithsonian's. There are 21 museums, there's the National Zoo, and there's even more research and education centers. All of them were able to stay open through Saturday this past weekend. And as of yesterday, as of Sunday, all of them are now closed, doors locked. We're outside of the National History Museum, which is the most popular of all of the Smithsonian locations. And even this morning, we've seen a steady stream of people walking up to the doors, seeing the sign that is on the doors behind us. There's a couple people walking up right now thinking that they can go into the Smithsonian Museum and thinking that they can, make this part of their visit or part of their day. We've heard from even some local people who had young children that she was hoping to take through the museum, something they don't typically get to do, coming in on a Monday, taking advantage of the federal holiday and really being disappointed that the Smithsonian's are closed. But especially for people that are in from out of town, it's extra disappointing. I talked to a couple from Oklahoma earlier this morning. They're here for a couple days while they're on their way to somewhere else in the Northeast, and they are certainly disappointed that their trip is not going as planned. Take a listen.
We'd been waiting for a number of years, and we thought, well, okay, we're coming through to go up to the New England area, so we wanted to stop in D.C. for 3-4 days, see all the Smithsonian's that we haven't gotten to see.
I feel sorry for the people that maybe made a vacation to come here. I mean, that's the ones that it's you got to be disappointed. But for us, we're just going to wander. We're just going to look, see the monuments, and make the most of it.
Now, one thing that we haven't spotted yet since we've been out here today are those large tourist groups that are very common and frequent all throughout Washington, D.C. The big buses, the school tours, the international tours. Haven't run into any of them yet this morning, but if we do, I'm certainly curious to ask how they are filling their time. I mentioned a local woman and some young kids. They were hoping to go through the Natural History Museum behind me. And so she's trying to figure out what to do now because the Smithsonian's are all free to the public. It is something that it is available to anyone. And so now she's trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with these kiddos, and thinking about other museums here in D.C. that maybe they can spend their time at, but they're not free. And so that's a big perk of the Smithsonian. And part of the draw is it gets millions of visits a year. The Natural History Museum alone, I think, had over 1.6 million visits in June of this year, Holly. So they are incredibly popular, and certainly some disappointed folks coming out to the National Mall today.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, I hope they find some other place to go that doesn't break the bank for them on vacation. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Thank you for that update. Up next on Today as It Happened.
We will return to legislative session as soon as the Democrats come to their senses and open the government. That is a necessity so that the work can continue and the members of Congress can do their jobs. barreling toward one of the longest shutdowns in American history unless Democrats drop their partisan demands and passed a clean, no-strings-attached budget to reopen the government and pay our federal workers.
Let's bring in Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed for more on the day 13 of the shutdown. And Nate, let's start there. Has anything changed, President Trump announcing that the military will get paid, but that's the military?
To be clear, not clear that he has the legal authority to do that. It, at this point, doesn't seem like there's anyone who's going to challenge him. I think congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle probably glad that the military is going to get those paychecks. But, you know, had he not announced that, a lot of questions about whether the pressure would be more so on one party or the other. To be clear, it looks like the military could get that payment. It could be rerouted from other sources. There's a lot of questions about whether the House of Representatives and the Senate will eventually need a vote to codify that, to allow those funds to move from one area to another. The administration cannot. It is illegal to just, unilaterally decide that money appropriated for one area goes to another area. So again, a lot of questions about what the future is there. But to be clear, there is no progress. The Capitol is quiet today. It is a federal holiday. It was always expected to be quiet today. But when the Senate returns tomorrow, they're probably going to run this vote again. No one's saying the eighth time's a charm. It's hard to see what needs to change. It's hard to see what would happen other than just, grassroots Democrats getting upset with the lack of progress here, or, starting to believe Republicans when they say they'll negotiate an extension to these Affordable Care Act tax credits once the government reopens. Right. But to be clear, you've got, Speaker Johnson announcing that some federal employees were getting some money last week. We have the members of the military getting paid. The stakes here, national parks are closed. There's a lot of uncertainty for both of those groups, but the stakes here seem comparatively low. So for that reason, it's hard to see what the off-ramp is if there's nothing immediately forcing one party or the other to come to the table. Both parties, to be clear, are dug in here.
Yeah, and for all those retirees waiting on their Social Security checks, the cost of living increases are about to be calculated coming up this week. Right. The Senate comes back tomorrow, as you said, but what about the House? What happens with them?
Well, Speaker Johnson announced in the last minute last Friday that the House of Representatives actually would not return this week. He had previously done the same thing last week. We've kind of been in this weird Groundhog Day situation where he's left the House home to try and ramp up the pressure on the U.S. Senate. He said, look, the House has passed its thing. It's done its job, got this across the finish line. Now the Senate needs to pass it. The question is, when is the Senate going to do so? We don't know if that's going to happen. But Speaker Johnson confirming to reporters today that, in fact, his plan, it sounds like, is to not bring the House back at all until the Senate passes this thing. Take a listen.
Right now, the House Republicans, I don't know what the Democrats are doing, but the House Republicans have been very busy. They're doing some of their best work in the district, helping their constituents navigate this crisis that's been created by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. The Schumer shutdown causes real pain for real people. Our members are doing very productive work. We're in constant communication with them, and we are ready to come back and continue the work in our committees and everything on the House floor. We will return to legislative session as soon as the Democrats come to their senses and open the government. That is a necessity so that the work can continue and the members of Congress can do their jobs.
Caught in the middle of two groups of people. Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva, the Democrat from Arizona, who Speaker Johnson
still waiting to be sworn in.
Exactly. He's refused to swear her in until they return to regular session. And furthermore, the American people, waiting for this all to end. Federal employees with so much uncertainty. I have, friends who are federal employees here in D.C. And, the question I got last week was like, can I book a flight next week? Am I going to be called back to work? Truly, people are not in control of their own destiny. And if you are furloughed, if you're one of the 750,000 or so federal employees that's furloughed, you really don't know the next time you're going to be called into work. You might be stuck at home. I just saw a local restaurant in D.C. now offering free meals or free menu items for federal employees, one of many that's done so, a Jose Andres chain of restaurants. So again, the longer this drags on, the more painful it becomes. In Congress, though, curious if that calculus changes, and the fact that Speaker Johnson refusing to bring the House of Representatives back. You've got Democrats now saying they're going to return to Washington tomorrow anyway. They want to be here in person to organize, to figure out the best path forward. But again, the House has largely, as Speaker Johnson said, done its job. They are waiting on the Senate, and Senate Democrats not backing down off this fight.
Before I let you go, will you weigh in on the Marjorie Taylor Greene factor? She has been all over the airwaves over the weekend talking about something needs to be done because she's concerned about health care, the subsidy. She's also concerned about her constituents, saying the calls are coming in saying, do something. Is she making a difference? Because Democrats are now saying, we like her all of a sudden.
Well, I think they like aspects of her policy. But what's interesting is when you listen to that, she's very quick to caveat, look, still a supporter of President Trump. She backs him wholeheartedly. But she's, been quite clear going against the grain on her party. Look, she went against the grain on her party on the Epstein files. And there's some argument right now to be made. Democrats say that there's a possibility. Speaker Johnson is actually keeping them out of D.C. because of the Epstein files. You might remember several months ago, he had to send the House home on their August recess early because of disagreements over moving legislation on the floor because, again, over the Epstein files. If he brings the House back, swears in Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva, Democrat from Arizona, she has said she'll be the 218th final signature on this petition to force a vote on releasing the Epstein files. Given the government shutdown, that creates a big distraction for Speaker Johnson, causes him to possibly lose control of what bills get a vote on the House floor. If that's the possibility here, it's easy to see why he's kind of trying to remove that possibility from occurring here.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed. Nate, as always, thanks for being with us.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
With the historic agreement we've just signed, those prayers of millions have finally been answered.
Watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's jump right in.
President Trump continues his trip through the Middle East at this hour as he winds down that historic peace summit in Egypt with dozens of world leaders who have gathered. The president speaking a moment ago about what he called a new beginning for an entire beautiful Middle East. His words. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull live in our D.C. newsroom now with the very latest. And Haley, what has been President Trump's message to the world leaders that did gather?
Well, Del, this has largely been a celebration for President Trump and world leaders of the breakthrough in Gaza, while at the same time looking ahead to its future. What we heard moments ago in President Trump's speech was him thanking leaders for their role, calling it a monumental moment, as those leaders also returned the praise of President Trump. President Trump declared the war over, told world leaders that they have, quote, achieved the impossible, while proclaiming peace in the Middle East after the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey signed that peace agreement. Now, the release of hostages today marks the first phase, though Trump noted that they are continuing the work on returning the bodies of those hostages that have been killed, while the next phase turns towards the governance, security, and reconstruction of Gaza in particular. That, Trump said specifically, may be what he called the easiest, noting countries have raised their hand to financially aid the reconstruction. He went on to say this about the next steps.
We've all agreed that supporting Gaza must be done to lift up the people themselves, but we don't want to fund anything having to do with bloodshed, hatred, or terror, as has happened in the past. And for the same reason, we're also agreed that Gaza's reconstruction requires that it be demilitarized.
Now, Del, Trump, when we pressed him on Friday about whether there is consensus on the next phases of his plan, said that there is consensus, but noted some details will need to be worked out, and indicated that he might seek to hash that out while in Egypt. He did also meet with leaders while they're on the ground. Notably, Egypt also presented to President Trump the Nile of the Collar. This is Egypt's highest state honor, Del.
And Haley, what about those next phases? All experts seem to indicate this is where the hard work begins. What do we know about that?
Yeah, this is where there are a lot of questions that still remain. The next piece is focused on governance and rebuilding of Gaza. These next steps, so historically, have been issues where there have been points of difference between some nations. Now, the specific next steps officials have indicated includes U.S. Central Command standing up a joint task force with up to 200 U.S. personnel already in the region who are not to go into Gaza, but to oversee the ceasefire and help ensure there are no violations, with forces including potentially from Egypt and Qatar. It also calls for the creation of an international stabilization force to help train police and secure borders, according to the deal that President Trump first publicly presented. It also calls for governance by what it calls a technocratic Palestinian committee with oversight from a board of peace President Trump says he will chair. He has not specifically laid out who else will also be on that board. It does not allow any role for Hamas governance. It also calls for the decommissioning of Hamas's weapons, with demilitarization tied to the Israeli forces' withdrawal. That is something Hamas has not yet agreed to publicly, Dell. Additionally, a Palestinian state is something Middle Eastern nations, as well as some major U.S. allies, have supported, while Israel has not. That's why it's notable that in remarks today, Egypt's President el-Sisi underscored the need for a two-state solution. The peace plan that President Trump presented does not outright guarantee that, but does nod to a potential future path for it. Trump, notably in his remarks, acknowledged the president of the Palestinian Authority, who was taking part in the summit, Dow.
He did, indeed. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull live in our D.C. newsroom. Haley, thank you very much. But today was a day of celebration. Hamas releasing all of the living hostages as part of that ceasefire deal with Israel. Their release coming more than 2 years after the fighting began. Israel, in turn, releasing close to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Many are hoping that this does indeed signal an end to the war between Hamas and Israel. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York City with the very latest on that force. And Alex, what has the reaction been to the hostage release so far?
Well, it's been mostly jubilation, Del. Of course, this is a bittersweet moment for all of Israel because not all of the hostages are back home, but Hostage Square today was completely full. It was full overnight with people there wanting to be there as the hostages were released. There was also a group of hundreds of people praying at the site of the Nova Music Festival. They're trying to turn over a new leaf as Israel kind of takes a breath for the first time in more than 2 years. These reunification videos are really something to watch. I want to show you one from Bar Cooperstein. His father was injured years before October 7th. This is the video of him. He was paralyzed and he couldn't speak. He spent the last 2 years working to be able to stand and walk and utter a few words so that he could greet his son. His mother, his grandmother was also there. That's his mother. And his grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and she was outspoken over the last 2 years. There she is, saying that she wanted to trade places with him. There were fathers and sons, and some of the fathers had barely met their children. Omri Moran, one of his daughters was just a couple of months old on October 7th. David Cuneo, his daughters were about 4 years old on October 7th. And then you have the twins, Gali and Ziv Berman. They are 28 years old. They were separated, both held hostage, didn't know if each other was alive. So not only were they being reunited with their own family members today, but they were also being reunited with each other. Now, there was a very odd part to the handing over of the hostages. It happened around 8 o'clock in the morning, Israel time. Some of the hostages in the later groups that were released were able to FaceTime their family members ahead of their release. We started getting these videos in. I was scrolling on my phone trying to figure out how this was possible. And then you look in the corner and you can see in the corner of that video is the captors of a couple of these hostages right there, right in the corners, having them FaceTime their parents in the moments leading up to their release. Now, they are all at the hospital right now. They've set up these hospital rooms, Dale, so that they can be almost more like hotel rooms for the family to stay at with them. They're going to be checked out over the next days, weeks, and for some of them even months. If you look at some of these reunification videos, it's very clear that they are very malnourished, and so there's going to have to be a lot of work done there. But we heard from the head of the nurses for one of the hospitals that a handful of the hostages are in. Listen to what she had to say.
For each of them, we have assembled a dedicated and personalized medical team, including a physician, mental health professionals, physiotherapists, and dietitians. These teams are now performing comprehensive medical evaluations tailored to each individual's needs. Drawing from our previous experience, we have developed a unique medical approach for addressing the physical and emotional effects of captivity. This approach emphasizes multidisciplinary care, emotional strength, rehabilitation, and helping each returnee rebuild their health and their life.
And Del, some of these hostages had not been above ground, we're learning, in 2 years. They were kept underground, some of them kept alone during these last 2 years. We've heard that from other hostages as well, until they met up with the Red Cross, which, by the way, the Red Cross did not visit any of these hostages over the last 2 years. So this was the first time they were coming in contact with really anybody from outside of Gaza. Now, it's interesting, just one little poetic moment about today. October 7th fell on a Jewish holiday called Simchat Torah, which is supposed to be a very festive holiday, and on the Jewish calendar, it happens to fall again today. So it is basically 2 years to the day, Del, that we are bookending this. And we heard from the Nova survivors this phrase over and over again saying, "We will dance again, we will dance again." And the holiday today is actually all about dancing.
And Alex, you said something, and explain a little bit further. Not all the families are celebrating today.
They're not. We were supposed to have 28 deceased hostages brought home by noon Israel time as well. They've obviously blown way past that deadline. So technically Hamas is in violation of this agreement. They did get a little bit of a heads up that Hamas was having difficulty, according to them, locating these hostages. Unclear if that's truthful or not, but there will be other countries that are brought into Gaza to help look for these hostages. Only 4 hostages were turned over to Israel today. They have now been, their coffins have been taken by the IDF. They're going to have DNA testing done right now to confirm that it's these 4 hostages in particular, because we have seen Hamas lie about that in the past. And so there is a very long road ahead for these families, including 2 Americans, Omer Nutra and Itai Chen. They're New Yorkers. They are still missing, and their families, along with the families of the other hostages, are fighting to make sure that they are not forgotten about as part of this deal. But it just goes to show how incredibly fragile this deal is right now, because technically Hamas is in violation of the deal. So really at any moment, anything could change. And so the fight continues. The hostage family is putting out a statement saying that they are going to continue pushing until all of the hostages are home. But just a really bittersweet moment. We heard Rachel Goldberg, the mother of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, talking about this earlier over the weekend, just saying that there's so much joy and so much pain, and you have to hold them together on days like today.
Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller, live for us in New York City. Alex, as always, thank you.
We'll be right back to continue our look at today's top stories. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's jump right back into our rundown of our top stories of the day.
A sigh of relief, if you will, if your retirement is tied to the market, say, for instance, your 401k. It follows Friday's staggering drop. Remember, the Dow falling 878 points on Friday. As you can see, it has rebounded and rebounded well right now. The Dow up 640 points. The S&P, by the way, on Friday, bleeding 3.5% at the end of the trading day. The massive shift has to do with the president's response to China clamping down on those rare earth minerals which China controls. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett joins us now, and she says the administration spent some of the weekend calming nerves. Mara, all of us are glad they did. Investors did not like the president threatening China with those tariffs of 100% or more.
Right, Del. This weekend was not one to be checking your 401k balance, that's for sure. And so things are appearing to settle out. The market's rebounding today upon the open. All of those indices that you mentioned coming back into the positive. And this comes after, as you mentioned, a weekend of the Trump administration looking to pull back on some of the aggressive tone and the aggressive moves we saw on Friday. Remember, this was in response to the president threatening to issue even more tariffs on China in response to them kind of pulling back on how they're going to manage exports when it comes to rare earth materials. And President Trump on Friday went so far as to even to threaten to cancel an upcoming meeting with Chinese President Xi. And so over the weekend, we did see the president post on Truth Social, trying to a different tone when it comes to negotiations between the U.S. and China. He wrote, "Don't worry about China. It will all be fine. Highly respected President Xi just had a bad moment. He doesn't want depression for his country, and neither do I." He wrote, "The USA wants to help China, not hurt it." And so that softer message was definitely a notable pivot after what we saw on Friday and how the market very quickly reacted to that, because obviously that would be a huge issue when it comes to all of the trade partnership that the U.S. has with China in terms of how much more things coming into the country would then cost and vice versa. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance also made a media appearance on Fox News on Sunday, and he echoed the sentiment in terms of trying to walk it down a little bit, but he was more direct in terms of what China needs to come to the table with when in terms of negotiations. I want to hear a little bit of what he said on Sunday.
It's going to be a delicate dance, and a lot of it is going to depend on how the Chinese respond. If they respond in a highly aggressive manner, I guarantee you the President of the United States has far more cards than the People's Republic of China. If, however, they're willing to be reasonable, then Donald Trump is always willing to be a reasonable negotiator. We're going to find out a lot in the weeks to come about whether China wants to start a trade war with us or whether they actually want to be reasonable.
Now, Chinese officials, for their part, over the weekend re-emphasized, their stance on a trade war, saying that they don't want it, but they're not afraid of it. They went on to say that if the U.S., quote, insists on going its own way, China will also resolutely take corresponding measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. And so we'll definitely have to keep monitoring what those conversations continue to look like, because as a reminder, that meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi set to take place later this month, and that truce between the U.S. and China that rolled back some of those escalating tit-for-tat tariffs, that is set to expire come November 1st. There's a lot of pressure between the U.S. and China, and the sentiment that investors are watching in terms of how the stock market reacts in the next couple of weeks, Del.
And Mara, the debate over the rare earths, or as I like to refer to them, those other symbols on the periodic table of elements that we paid no attention to in high school, it ultimately comes down to whether the U.S. can be well equipped in terms of national security.
Right, and it's something that the U.S. is definitely paying more attention to, even given its status on the periodic table, because they're key ingredients now for everything that is being produced, from electric vehicle motors to smartphones to those key U.S. defense systems. And so all of this is a reminder that while America leads in innovation for the most part, China still controls a vast majority of the world's rare earth processing, which then gives Beijing major leverage. And given all this back and forth politically, some in corporate America are responding. J.P. Morgan Chase this morning announcing a $10 billion investment in U.S. companies that are focused on defense and aerospace, cutting-edge tech like AI, as well as quantum computing and energy technology. So that's batteries and advanced manufacturing. And the CEO wrote in a statement saying it's become, quote, painfully clear that the U.S. has allowed itself to become too reliant on unreliable sources of critical minerals and manufacturing manufacturing, calling out saying they're all essential for our national security. And so that just goes to show the private sector stepping in to incentivize U.S. production and U.S. Resources on this end, because the confidence in China isn't resolute given all of the drama we saw this weekend. And again, analysts say that these markets that we've been tracking are reacting more to tone than policy right now. So as long as the president sounds relatively open to dialogue, it seems that the market is seeing that tensions will cool at least temporarily over the next couple weeks before those key meetings that I mentioned earlier, Adele.
Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett. Mara, as always, thank you very much for being with us.
Up next on Today's It Happened.
The CDC mass firing employees, then bringing some back a day later. Katia Tubman coming up, why hundreds of layoffs at the agency were reversed, and what's ahead at the CDC.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily rundown of today's top stories.
A former CDC official told us the mass firing of agency employees last Friday and then the rehiring of them the next day was due to a technical coding error. That's what she says current staffers have been told by the Department of Health. But even with many of those employees being brought back, there's still a lot of concern around instability at the agency and the impact on public health.
Fired and then rehired. That's the story for many CDC employees. The agency terminated some 1,300 workers Friday, but then rehired around 700 of them over the weekend, according to the union that represents federal workers. Initial terminations included CDC employees working on the U.S. measles response and Ebola containment in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as staff at 6 global CDC offices, according to former CDC Chief Medical Officer Dr. Deborah Howry.
I was very thrown off when that was laid off, because that allows CDC to really respond to emergencies around the world.
Howry says that instability at the CDC is hurting morale at the agency.
Morale is at an all-time low and continuing to plummet. And just really seeing how the secretary continues to say things about the CDC that aren't true and aren't supportive of the staff, like don't trust the experts. That does not help morale.
The incident is the latest impacting an agency that's undergone sweeping changes this year, with Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. carrying out major cuts across the CDC.
What I'm trying to do at the agency is return it to gold standard science, to make sure that anything that we tell the public, we tell the public what we know and what we don't know.
But opponents of Kennedy's leadership say shrinking the agency leaves the U.S. less prepared to handle future health crises.
I am concerned about not just the future of CDC, but public health in the United States and the health of Americans if the CDC is not functional.
We reached out to the health department and CDC about the potential for more terminations, but did not hear back. The White House has implied that more federal workers could be laid off if the government shutdown continues to lag on. Katia Tubman, Scripps News Group, New York.
Thank you for joining us this evening for Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. We hope you have a great Monday night.